So, with everything turning political, you got to be on the right, you got to be on the left, you got to be part of the 1619 Project, you got to be part of the 1776 Project, or Commission Report, whatever they call it. But how should we look at history? So, and by the way, thank you for watching and subscribing and for your input. I just put out a video, a short, asking the audience, how long do you want these videos to be? I generally use a still shot of Chewy, my voice smartphone. We talk about the news of the day, maybe a tinge of politics, but the main focus is to preserve great art, music, history, culture. Sometimes I feel like a lone voice here on YouTube. But thank you again for your input, because it was really surprising. Somebody wrote, I like these videos to be maybe between 10 to 40 minutes. What do you do in that space, right? So, pardon me, I'm trying to kind of balance things out between shorts and long form videos, but it's generally a still shot. Like I said, you, me, my voice, smartphone, talk about the news of the day, etc., etc. So I want to share this article with you that delves into this topic. This is by Mindy Clegg. This appears at, I think it's the History News Network, HNN. This is HNN, like CNN. And the title of the article, this came out just a few days ago, May 8th. The past is alive to those who wish to see it. And being somebody who writes music in his spare time, this really hits home, because when I listen to, let's say, a symphony by Haydn, or a lesser-known composer, because a lot of people don't realize that a lot of these composers back in the day, they were provincial composers. They worked in a particular city or a particular region, and their music may have not been known outside of that region. Now we're starting to discover all these different scores. I mean, as I've said before, there are scores upon scores upon scores that are out there that are finally getting published, and then some people don't want to publish that because the family wants to keep on to those documents, what have you, which is understandable. But if it's great music, share it with the public. Let's hear it. As I've said before, if you've got great music, great art, bring it to the table. Let's hear it. Let's see it. So as not to ramble on in the video here, I'm going to try to keep this as concise, as brief as possible. Maybe we can hit maybe the 18-minute mark. A little dirty, or little inside baseball here. I was going to say dirty little secret, but inside baseball. I use my phone to record these videos. It's the best way to do it, and upload it to YouTube. I have issues if I do it from my laptop. So I do it with my phone. That's what I'm more comfortable with. But let's get into this in this article here by Mindy Clegg. The past is alive to those who wish to see it. She talks about how there's a lot of complexity. And how, for example, you have the Declaration of Independence, which set the course for, well, the American Revolution set the course for the French Revolution, for the revolution in Haiti. Then, of course, you have what happened in the 20th century with the Bolsheviks, with Marx and Engels. She gets into that, as I said. So we'll just kind of skim through this for the sake of time. But it's a really good article, again, over at HNN by Mindy Clegg. Came out May 8th. Here we go. Those who study history as a field of knowledge production, like myself, often differ in their understanding of what it is from the general public. Much of the public views history as entertainment or a boring list of names and dates, not anything critical to modern life. It's really funny. As I said, being somebody who listens to music, loves music, writes music in his spare time, I can attest to this fact here, because you go back and you listen to let's say Franz Bruggen in the orchestra of the 18th century, you get a very different sound than what we're used to. And listening to different recordings by different orchestras of a different piece from a different period, or let's say you're talking about the Beatles from the 1960s. You go back and you listen to those recordings when they were at the Hollywood Bowl, or let's say it's Jimi Hendrix. You notice that the sound quality, or the sound was a lot more raw then than this refined sound that we're used to now, because we live in the digital age. That wasn't the case, back in the 50s and 60s. They were dealing with analog. It says here, in some cases, it's positioned as a mode of predicting what will most certainly come next. Historians tend to view history as more dynamic and in flux depending on the present. And we really should be looking at history, as it was, as it played out, based on primary documents. But where do perceptions of the past between the two groups diverge, and is there a danger in the divergence? So again, a real good article here. As I said, I'm just going to skim through it. I would argue that the difference is in how more popular perceptions understand the past as dead, while those engaged in knowledge production view it as alive, speaking to us, demanding our attention to rethink the world around us. That disconnect is fed by popular historical narratives found in nationalist, theological histories, and by mass-mediated narratives in film and television. For many, history is something back there, not something that informs us in the here and now. As such, the public is missing out on the power that understanding history is in a more holistic way we can hold. That causes real problems, as history for most isn't something that is fully real, nor something that can shape our understanding of what's possible in the world. And this is very true. There is a disconnect. It's funny, if you go back, you go on YouTube here, and you look at all these videos about the Civil War, how many videos are out there about the Civil War compared to the American Revolution? How many people talk about, let's say, the War of 1812? The War of 1812 completely gets overlooked, and yet it was the War of 1812 which led to the Hartford Convention, and they were talking about secession. In 1814, 1815, they were floating that about the Hartford Convention over the War of 1812, even though that was a victory for the U.S., and you've got film and television that portrays these things. Of course, you got people in Hollywood that come out with these films or these series, let's say a film or a series like Roots or a movie like Glory. Roots is a great series, Glory is a great film, but it's Hollywood. And you're really not going to be able to, I know I'm going to, ruffle a couple feathers when I say this, Gone with the Wind is probably a more accurate portrayal of what life was like back in the antebellum South. Now, I'm not talking about how they, their viewpoint on that era based on this book, Gone with the Wind, but if you go back and read the book, it's really romantic epic. And they mentioned this before, they interviewed Margaret Mitchell about this, and she said, I thought it gave these characters, the respect they deserve as characters, dignity, and she was writing this book in a time based on how things were at that time. So, you compare that to a movie like Glory or a series like Roots. One of those came out in the 70s for Roots and then in the early 90s for Glory. But again, it's Hollywood. How are you going to portray everything that happened in that time period, whatever the time period is, in a 2-hour film? This is what I'm trying to say. So I'm doing this in one take, so forgive me if the words don't all come out here. Goes on to say, as we're skimming through this, popular perceptions of the past rest in two ideas. That of inevitability of events of of the past, and the second is the objectification or flattening of the past. First, popular historical narratives tend to rest on the idea of a singular technological narrative, either progressive or sometimes cyclical, such as in Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West. What happened, happened, and that's just fate. Nationalistic historical narratives tend to embrace that framing along a continuum from liberal to fascist. The quote-unquote nation in these histories are an inevitable outcome of history or a body that has always existed in the past and will into the future. And we're seeing this play out now. The 1619 Project, the 1776 Commission, whatever you want to call it. 1619 Project says the first slave ship came here in 1619, but you go back and you check the history. I'm from Florida originally, and you know that the Spanish and the Portuguese were the first to bring slaves to the Americas, going back to the late 1400s, early 1500s. The first Thanksgiving, it's believed, didn't even happen in Massachusetts. Didn't happen at Plymouth Rock. It's believed that you have the quote-unquote first Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving Mass that happened in St. Augustine, and there was one that happened in Texas, like near El Paso, I think the El Paso Desert. And by the way, they didn't eat turkey, it was caquito, which I would love to have sometime. Caquito was what they ate. Caquito, and they had wine, they had hard biscuits with it, or sea biscuits as they were known, which the sailors would carry with them because they could last a long time, especially at sea. Modern liberalism, it says here, is seen as the inevitable outcome of the Enlightenment. The modern nation state is an inevitable outcome of the historical process of the Enlightenment. In other words, that we think about the Declaration of Independence as one example, a document seen as a pinnacle of the Enlightenment itself. The American Revolution is seen as influencing the French and Haitians as a larger part of the Age of Revolutions. However, other revolutionary movements are often less connected to the American one, especially once you talk about Marx and Engels influencing these labor relations or bringing these labor relations movements to the table. In the popular perception of the 19th century, the various socialist and nationalist uprisings in the mid-century becomes an aberration that led to one of the two great disasters of the 20th century, the Bolshevik and the fascist revolutions. But both socialism and race-based nationalism, let me get something to drink here, my mouth's getting a little dry. Again, we do these in one take. I really have a lot of fun doing these videos, I really do. I can just come here and be myself and just relaxed atmosphere, no pressure. We do the complete opposite of what you're supposed to do on YouTube. But as it was saying here, both socialism and race-based nationalism came out of the Enlightenment and shaped the modern world as much as liberalism. Liberalism has been flattened historically in this view of history, stripped of any friction or problematic elements. As such, these revolutions, socialism, fascism, were ahistorical impositions. Socialist and fascist are operations from the quote-unquote normal course of history, but are the only ones with agency. So I'm going to move on here to this other paragraph because she really gets into the crux of the matter here with this next section. The other point of division between historians and the general public is that of the objectification of the past. Imagining the past is disconnected from us, dead to a certain degree. This is probably a bit harder to unpack, especially since it's also a key aspect of historical training. We are told to write a story that is as grounded in facts and sources as possible, which is obviously a solid foundation for writing a historical narrative, but we're also told to do so in a dispassionate way as possible, which can result in objectified and dead stories that often feel disconnected from the present. That is so true. You have to look at history as it was, what was being what played out, at that time, let's say 1860. What were Southerners thinking in 1860? What was going on 20 years earlier? How many people know that the state of South Carolina had threatened to secede in 1852, but on the advice of the other southern states did not do so? The other slave-holding state says, don't secede. This isn't the right time to do it. Even though John C. Calhoun believed in secession, by the way, he was a staunch Unionist, he believed in secession, but he believed in keeping the Union together, whatever form that took. If it meant you had so many states in the Union, fine. If you had, less states, well, states have a right to govern themselves. A lot of people don't know that. John C. Calhoun, yes, he believed in slavery, his positive good speech, but he was a staunch Unionist who also believed in states' rights. Goes on to say here, we're also told to do so as possible, as I said, which dehumanizes those in the past, in the sense that we do not think of them as people in the same way, but as characters in a story. We should acknowledge that it is hard to understand the world that people in the past experienced. The people of the past are not us, of course, but we probably should not understand them as completely alien either. We should look at them as people that lived in a different time when you didn't have telephones, you had the telegraph, you had newspapers, but you really didn't have a whole lot of trains or automobiles, you didn't have cell phones, you didn't have satellites, you didn't have all the modern conveniences, air conditioning, the internet. Could you imagine what would have happened at Fort Sumter if we had the internet? I'm still looking for somebody to find a photo. This would be so awesome if they uncovered a photo that was actually taken during the battle or during this incident at Fort Sumter. I kind of talked with somebody about this, and they said, well, they really wouldn't be able to do that because the cameras at the time would have not been able to capture everything or just been a blur. But just to have an image, a photographic image of that event would have been awesome. Or it'd be awesome if somebody finds one. I'm sure one day we will find one. Just like we're finding all these scores by these lesser-known composers that lived in whatever part of Europe was at the time. But we should work to understand their specific context, which is a tougher proposition than just remembering important people and dates. Go back, or you go and you listen to a Haydn symphony, or you listen to the Beatles, or a speech by MacArthur, or Winston Churchill, whatever it is, you get a real sense. I'll tell you, you'll get a real sense of what it was like back then. One of the most surreal moments for me is I have this album set. Yes, I still listen to vinyl. Album set that's got Jack Benny and all these radio bits. It's with the Symphony Longinette, or whatever the name of the company was that sold watches back in the day. Well, they came out with all these album sets, and one of them is the Golden Age of Radio. And on one of them, they have these different news reports from World War II, and they featured a letter. They read a letter from a soldier at that time. And I forget what I was doing, but it was so surreal. It felt, just listening to that. They always say that radio is theater of the mind, and that's what I try to do here, make this, radio of YouTube. But I listened to that. I literally stopped what I was doing, because how they described everything that was going on in World War II, it was like I was there. And my jaw dropped. I was shocked by what I was hearing, because the description was so vivid from a soldier in World War II. Can't remember if it was a soldier, or if it was an airline, or if it was a pilot, fighter pilot. But that description of talking about these fellow soldiers who were dying on the field, what was going on, a vivid example of something that happened, living example of something that happened in the past, something that was recorded by a soldier, written in a letter, that was read and recorded on an album that I'm hearing today. Isn't that awesome? The importance of preserving great art, music, history, and culture. Now, they go on to talk about the Nazis, about this this argument between these two historical, or these two scholars on the Holocaust, Christopher Browning and Daniel Goldenhagen. It says here, both explored a single unit during the Nazi era known as the Reserve Police Battalion 101, coming to these different conclusions based on the very same set of documents. Browning argued that the men in that unit who carried out horrific atrocities during the Holocaust, which was absolutely horrible, were in part driven by a need to bend to authority and by peer pressure. It was not just their irrational hatred of Jewish people that led them to participate in the Holocaust. It complicates the story and shows that such forces can be at work in almost any modern society. Whereas Goldhagen insisted on a more Soderweg, I believe is how you say it, Sonderweg, and that's in parentheses here, thesis. He argued that German anti-Semitism was particularly pernicious, hope I'm saying that right, eliminationist anti-Semitism, all these long terms they use, making Germans more willing to murder Jewish people at scale. Germans come off in his narrative as just driven by their hate of Jewish people, flattening the events of the Holocaust and safely putting it into the past. One of these two narratives ends up shaping our understanding of the events of the Holocaust more than the other. Just think of the ways that much of pop culture has used Nazis as a shorthand for evil rather than people carrying out an act of evil. And that's how we should look at this. You have people who were just bad people. You had people that got caught in the mix. And that's the sad result here. But let me end with this. It says, this flattens the reality of how such an event could happen. It was something that could have only happened there and then, not in the here and now. That makes us less receptive to how these events can unfold in our own backyards or around the world. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thought I'd share this with you again by Mindy Clegg, talking about how the past isn't something that's way back there. Past is alive to those who wish to see it. Follow me at Instagram, Jason19711. You can find me at Substack or go to Culture Confederacy at Culture Confed 1 on X. This is the Culture Confederacy saying peace out, stay safe, everybody. Keep up the culture. God bless, and I'll catch you next time.